The night Noah Carter was kicked out of his own house, winter hadn't officially arrived yet, but it already felt like it had chosen him. Noah was 15, too old to be called a child when it was convenient for adults, too young to be treated like one when he needed protection. He stood on the cracked concrete porch with a worn backpack slung over one shoulder, the front door closing behind him with a dull, final sound that echoed deeper than the cold. "Don't come back until you learn some respect." That was the last thing his stepfather said. No shouting, no dramatic goodbye, just a flat, dismissive sentence, spoken like Noah was being told to take out the trash, not like a kid being erased from his own home. The porch light flicked off. For a moment, Noah stood there, frozen, not by the temperature, but by disbelief. He waited almost foolishly for the door to open again, for someone to say, "Hey, this went too far," for his mother to step in, for anything. Nothing happened. The street was quiet in that small American town kind of way. No traffic, no voices, just the faint hum of a distant highway and the rustle of bare branches swaying under a pale moon. Houses lined the road, each one glowing softly from inside. Warm kitchens, televisions, families settling into the comfort of routine. None of them were his anymore. Noah adjusted the straps of his backpack. Inside were a hoodie, two shirts, a pair of socks, and a notebook with torn edges. Not enough to survive, just enough to remind him of what he'd lost. He started walking. At first, he didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay there. Couldn't stand in front of that house and feel smaller by the second. His sneakers scraped against the asphalt as he moved down the road, shoulders tense, jaw tight, trying to keep his breathing steady. He told himself not to cry. Crying wouldn't change anything. Crying wouldn't open doors. The argument replayed in his head whether he wanted it to or not. It hadn't even been about something big. A late bus, a bad grade, a sarcastic comment spoken at the wrong time. His stepfather's voice rising, sharp and impatient. His own voice cracking, defensive, tired of swallowing every word. That was the thing no one ever seemed to understand. Noah wasn't angry for no reason. He was exhausted. Exhausted from trying to be quiet, from trying not to take up space, from being reminded over and over again that he wasn't really wanted. The town limits came faster than he expected. Streetlights thinned out, replaced by longer stretches of darkness. The air grew colder, sharper, slipping through the thin fabric of his hoodie and settling into his bones. Noah shoved his hands into his pockets, fingers numb, heart pounding with a fear he refused to name. He considered calling someone. But who? Friends had parents who asked questions, teachers who would call home, coaches who would insist on explanations. Every option felt like another door slamming shut, just in a different way. So he kept walking. Past the last row of houses, past the old sign warning drivers about deer crossings, toward the edge of town, where pavement gave way to dirt roads and the trees closed in like silent witnesses. Everyone in town knew that forest. Parents warned their kids about it. Stories floated around about people getting lost, about strange noises at night, about places no one bothered to check anymore. Teenagers joked about it during the day and avoided it after dark. Noah stepped into it without hesitation. The ground beneath his feet changed, softer and uneven. The smell of damp earth and old leaves filled the air. The forest felt colder, but also quieter, like it wasn't judging him, like it didn't care who he was supposed to be. He walked until his legs started to ache and the adrenaline wore off, leaving behind a heavy, trembling fatigue. When he finally stopped, it was because his body gave up, not because he found something safe. He leaned against a tree, sliding down until he was sitting on the ground, knees pulled to his chest. The silence pressed in around him, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the whisper of wind moving through branches. This was it. This was what being alone actually felt like. Noah stared at his hands in the dim light, noticing how they shook. Not dramatically, just enough to betray him. He clenched them into fists, trying to force the fear back down. He had always believed he was tougher than most kids his age, that he could handle more, that he didn't need much. But sitting there cold and unwanted, he realized toughness didn't mean much without somewhere to belong. He thought about going back, about knocking on the door, apologizing even if he didn't know what he was apologizing for. Then he remembered the look on his stepfather's face. Not anger, not rage, just indifference. And something inside Noah hardened. He stood up again. If he was going to survive the night, he needed more than stubborn pride. He needed shelter, even something temporary, even something everyone else thought was useless. As he pushed deeper into the forest, his flashlight flickering weakly, he noticed shapes that didn't quite belong. Dark outlines against darker shadows, fallen logs, broken structures half swallowed by vines. Places most people walk past without really seeing. One shape in particular caught his attention. It wasn't a house, not really. Just something old, forgotten, and barely standing. Something people would laugh at if they knew he was considering it. Noah slowed his steps, heart pounding again, but this time not just from fear, from possibility. He didn't know it yet, but the place he was about to step into would change everything. Not because it was strong, not because it was warm, but because, for the first time that night, it didn't turn him away. And for a 15-year-old boy who had just lost his home, that was enough to take one more step forward. Noah Carter stood still at the edge of the clearing, the weak beam of his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The shape in front of him didn't look like a place someone could live. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't a tent. It wasn't anything that made sense. Just a dark, awkward outline half swallowed by shadows and vines, sitting low against the forest floor, like something the woods had tried and failed to erase. Most people would have turned away. Most people would have laughed and kept walking. Noah took a step closer. The ground dipped slightly as he approached. The earth packed down as if something heavy had been resting there for a long time. Leaves crunched under his shoes, and the smell of damp wood grew stronger, old, earthy, and sharp in a way that reminded him of rain-soaked summers and forgotten places. Up close, he could see what it really was. A massive fallen tree. The trunk stretched longer than a pickup truck, its bark darkened with age, its surface scarred by time and weather. One end was jagged and splintered, where it must have snapped years ago. The other tapered into the forest like it had simply laid down to rest. And in the middle, there was an opening. Not big, not obvious. Just wide enough for a boy his size to crouch and look inside. Noah swallowed hard. He'd heard the stories. Everyone in town had. About kids daring each other to explore the woods and coming back pale and shaken. About animals nesting in fallen trees. About things crawling, biting, hiding where light didn't reach. He aimed the flashlight into the opening. The beam slid along smooth curved wood, hollowed out by years of slow decay. The inside wasn't wet like he expected. It wasn't crawling with bugs. It was dry, quiet, still. The tree was hollow. Noah crouched lower, heart pounding, listening for movement. There was none. Just silence and the faint sound of wind brushing through the treetops above him. He glanced back toward the path he'd come from, the invisible line separating him from town, from warmth, from everything he used to know. Going back meant knocking on doors, explaining, being sent somewhere he didn't choose. Staying meant risk, but it was a risk that belonged to him. He dropped his backpack first, pushing it gently into the hollow. It slid farther than he expected, disappearing into darkness. Noah hesitated only a second longer before ducking his head and crawling inside. The wood scraped softly against his sleeves as he moved forward, careful and slow. The air inside was cooler than the forest outside, but not biting, not hostile. The flashlight revealed a space wider than he imagined, curved walls arching overhead, the scent of cedar lingering faintly in the air. It felt sheltered. Noah sat back on his heels, chest rising and falling fast. He turned the light in a slow circle, cataloging everything the way his mind always did when he was nervous. The ground sloped gently but wasn't soaked. The ceiling was high enough for him to sit upright without hunching. A few narrow cracks near the top let thin lines of moonlight slip through. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't nothing. He laughed quietly to himself, a short, breathless sound that surprised him. If anyone from town could see him now, crouched inside a dead tree like some feral kid, they'd shake their heads and call him crazy. The thought stung more than he expected. Noah set his backpack beside him and pulled out his hoodie, layering it over the one he was already wearing. The cold crept in slowly, the kind that sank deep instead of striking all at once. He rubbed his arms, then pressed his palms against the curved wall. The wood felt solid, thick. He leaned his back against it, testing, listening. The tree didn't creak, didn't shift. It had been here long before him and didn't seem in any hurry to leave. Outside, a gust of wind tore through the forest, rattling branches and sending leaves skittering across the ground. Noah tensed, waiting for the cold to rush in. But it didn't. The hollow absorbed the sound, muting it, wrapping the space in a strange, heavy calm. That's when it hit him. This place wasn't just hiding him, it was protecting him. The realization settled in his chest, warm and unfamiliar. He'd spent so long feeling like everything around him was temporary, friendships, homes, promises, that the idea of something simply holding felt almost unreal. He shifted closer to the center of the hollow, curling his legs in, pulling his backpack tight against his side like a pillow. The ground was hard, unforgiving, but exhaustion dulled the discomfort. His muscles ached from walking. His mind buzzed with too many thoughts and nowhere to put them. Images flashed behind his closed eyes. His room, the posters he'd left behind, the dent in the wall from a door slammed too hard one night. His mother's face, tired and distant, the porch light clicking off. Noah opened his eyes again. Not here, not now. He needed to focus on what came next. Surviving one night was luck. Surviving more would take effort. He studied the interior again, this time with intent. The way the floor dipped toward the edges. The spots where cold air might slip through. The cracks overhead that would let rain in if the weather turned. Problems. But problems could be solved. That thought steadied him more than anything else. He pulled his notebook from the backpack, flipping past half-filled pages of old homework and half-written thoughts. On a blank page, he started listing what he'd noticed, what he'd need, what he could fix with time and patience. Shelter didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be better than nothing. Hours passed without him noticing. The forest outside darkened, the moon sliding higher. Noah shifted positions, testing how the cold moved, how the space held heat. When he finally lay down, curled on his side, he expected fear to keep him awake. Instead, something else crept in. Relief. For the first time that night, no one was yelling at him. No one was telling him to leave. No one was deciding his worth based on their bad day. The tree didn't care who he was. It just let him stay. As sleep pulled him under, Noah didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if this strange, forgotten place would last. He didn't know how long he could keep going on his own. But he knew one thing. Everyone in town thought places like this were useless. They were wrong. And someday, maybe sooner than anyone expected, this place they'd never looked twice at would prove it. Morning came quietly. No sirens, no alarms. Just a thin gray light slipping through the cracks near the top of the hollow tree, brushing across Noah Carter's face like a cautious hand. He woke stiff and disoriented, his body curled tight, every muscle protesting. For a split second, panic flared. Where am I? Until the smell of old wood and damp leaves brought everything back. The forest, the fallen tree, the night he hadn't frozen. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, listening. Birdsong filtered in from somewhere above him. A woodpecker tapped rhythmically in the distance. The world had kept going, indifferent to the fact that his life had cracked open the night before. Noah let out a shaky breath. He was still here. That realization carried more weight than he expected. Not just relief, something sturdier, a cautious pride. He had made it through the night on his own, in a place everyone else would have dismissed without a second thought. The hollow was colder now, the warmth of his body long gone. He stood stretching carefully and took stock of his surroundings with clearer eyes. In daylight, the tree's interior revealed its flaws more honestly. The ground sloped enough to make sleeping awkward. A draft crept in from the open end. Those thin cracks overhead would turn into a problem the first time it rained. But none of it felt impossible. Noah stepped outside, blinking as the pale morning light hit his face. The clearing looked different in daylight, less threatening, more exposed. Ferns carpeted the ground, and tall pines ringed the space like quiet guards. From here, the fallen tree didn't look like shelter. It looked like a mistake. "Guess that makes two of us," Noah muttered under his breath. His stomach growled, sharp and insistent. He reached into his backpack and found a crushed granola bar, the last thing he hadn't rationed yet. He ate it slowly, chewing longer than necessary, trying to make it last. Food would be a problem. So would water, and warmth, and everything else. The list felt overwhelming until he forced himself to break it down. One thing at a time. He spent the morning moving, gathering fallen branches, dragging dry leaves and pine needles closer to the opening of the hollow, testing different spots inside the tree, learning where the cold pooled and where the air stayed still. His movements were careful, deliberate, born not of confidence but of attention. Noah had always been observant. It was how he survived arguments at home, reading moods, anticipating shifts, knowing when to stay quiet. Now that same instinct turned outward, focused on the forest. By midday, his hands were scratched and sore, his hoodie streaked with dirt. He barely noticed. He stuffed leaves into gaps near the base of the hollow, packing them tight to block the breeze. He dragged a wide, flat piece of bark over the opening, angling it just enough to let air pass while cutting the wind. When he stepped back and tested it, the difference was immediate. Less draft, less bite. A small win, but it felt enormous. As the afternoon wore on, Noah became aware of a sound he hadn't noticed before. Voices, faint but human. He froze. They came from beyond the trees, closer to the edge of the forest. Noah ducked instinctively, peering through the brush. Two figures moved along a narrow trail. Older teenagers, maybe seniors from the high school. One kicked at the dirt as they walked. The other laughed at something Noah couldn't hear. His chest tightened. He stayed still, barely breathing, until they passed. Only when their voices faded did he let himself exhale. The thought of being discovered, of having to explain himself, sent a cold spike of fear through him. Not yet. He wasn't ready. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small tasks and constant vigilance. Noah found a shallow stream not far from the clearing and filled his empty bottle, drinking carefully. He returned to the tree and continued adjusting, refining, learning. As evening approached, clouds gathered low and heavy, turning the sky a dull steel gray. The air grew damp, carrying the promise of rain. Noah watched the clouds with a wary eye. This would be the test. When the rain finally came, it started gently. A soft tapping on leaves, a faint drumming against bark. Noah retreated into the hollow, sitting back, listening as water ran along the curve of the tree's exterior. At first, nothing happened. Then a thin drip fell near the far end of the hollow, darkening the dirt. Noah cursed under his breath and scrambled for bark, pressing it against the spot, angling it, adjusting until the drip slowed and stopped. He worked fast, heart racing, adrenaline sharpening his focus. The rain picked up, heavier now, but inside the hollow, it stayed mostly dry. The patched opening held. The leaves packed into gaps swelled with moisture, sealing tighter instead of loosening. When the rain eased an hour later, Noah collapsed against the wall, exhausted and smiling. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. That night, as he sat just inside the opening, watching mist rise from the forest floor, Noah noticed movement at the edge of the clearing again. This time, it wasn't teenagers. It was an older man. The stranger paused when he saw the fallen tree, squinting like he wasn't sure what he was looking at. Noah's pulse spiked. He stayed still, hidden by shadow, watching as the man took a few steps closer. "Must be kidding me," the man muttered. Noah recognized him, one of the maintenance workers from town, a guy who fixed fences and cleared brush when the county needed cheap labor. The man circled the tree, shaking his head, then laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Someone's living in that?" he said to no one in particular. "Yeah, right." He walked off, still chuckling. Noah waited long after the man disappeared before moving again. The laughter burned worse than the cold. That night, curled inside the hollow with his back against the thick wood, Noah stared into the darkness and replayed the moment over and over. The disbelief, the dismissal, the certainty that whatever he was doing couldn't possibly last. He hugged his backpack closer. Let them laugh. They hadn't been here when the rain came. They hadn't felt how the wind slid past instead of cutting through. They hadn't listened to the forest the way he had learned to, quietly, patiently, without expecting it to explain itself. Tomorrow he would do more. Tomorrow he would make this place stronger. Noah closed his eyes, jaw set with a quiet resolve that felt heavier and steadier than anger. They thought this place was a joke. He was going to prove it wasn't. By the time Noah Carter realized winter wasn't just coming, it was already circling. His hands had grown rough and cracked, and his sense of time had blurred into a series of short days and longer nights. The forest changed first. The air sharpened, carrying a brittle edge that bit at exposed skin. Leaves thinned, crunching loudly underfoot. The stream he relied on ran lower and colder, its surface trembling each morning with a thin skin of ice that broke when he knelt to fill his bottle. Noah watched all of it closely. Winter had a way of announcing itself without words, and he listened the way someone listens when they know a warning matters. In town, people talked about the cold like it was an inconvenience, something to complain about at the grocery store or mention casually over coffee. Out here, it was a deadline. He worked harder. Each day began with movement, because standing still meant freezing. Noah gathered thicker branches now, dragging them one by one back to the clearing. He layered bark over bark at the opening of the hollow, adjusting angles, testing airflow with careful hands. When the wind shifted, he shifted with it, but effort didn't quiet down. It crept in during the quiet moments, when the sky went dull and gray, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. When his fingers went numb and the ache in his shoulders lingered longer than it should have. At night, wrapped in everything he owned, Noah stared into the darkness and wondered if he was lying to himself. People didn't survive winters like this alone. That was what everyone said. The first time someone spoke to him directly, it caught him off guard. He was hauling branches near the edge of the forest when a voice called out, sharp and incredulous. "Hey, what the hell are you doing out here?" Noah froze. A man stood near the trail, mid-40s, heavy jacket, baseball cap pulled low. One of the town's volunteer firefighters. Noah had seen him before, directing traffic at parades, laughing with other adults who never looked his way. The man took in the clearing, the fallen tree, the makeshift adjustments Noah had made. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You living here?" he asked. Noah swallowed. Lying felt pointless. "Yeah." The man let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Kid, that's not living. That's asking to freeze." Noah's jaw tightened. "I'm fine." The firefighter studied him for a moment, eyes narrowing. Not cruel, but skeptical. "Where are your parents?" The question landed hard. "Don't have any," Noah said, voice flat. The man sighed, rubbing his face. "Look, I don't know what you think you're proving, but winter's no joke. You can't ride this out in a dead tree." Noah didn't respond. He just stood there, shoulders squared, hands clenched around the branch he'd been carrying. After a long moment, the man shook his head again. "Suit yourself, but don't expect a rescue if this goes bad." He walked away. Noah watched him disappear down the trail, the words echoing louder than the footsteps. "Don't expect a rescue." That night, the temperature dropped fast. The wind came first, restless, probing, slipping through the trees with a low, constant moan. Noah huddled inside the hollow, adjusting the bark at the opening, stuffing leaves deeper into the gaps. The tree held, but the cold pressed in harder than before. He burned through his energy faster, his body fighting to stay warm. His thoughts drifted to town, lit windows, heaters humming, people complaining about drafts while sitting on couches. He wondered if any of them thought about him at all. The answer came sooner than he expected. The next afternoon, two teenagers appeared at the edge of the clearing. They didn't bother hiding their curiosity. One nudged the other, pointing openly. "No way," one of them said. "That's the kid." Noah stayed where he was, stacking wood, pretending not to hear. The boys crept closer, laughter rising. "You serious?" the taller one called out. "You actually living in that thing?" Noah didn't look up. "That's insane," the other added. "My dad says you won't last a week once the snow hits." The words burned, but they weren't new. When Noah finally straightened, his face was calm, almost detached. "You done?" The boys hesitated, thrown off by his lack of reaction. One scoffed. "Just saying. Don't blame anyone when this turns bad." They left laughing, their voices fading into the trees. Noah exhaled slowly. Anger flared, hot and sharp, but beneath it was something worse. Uncertainty. That night, he dreamed of the porch light turning back on, of the door opening, of warmth spilling out and pulling him in whether he deserved it or not. He woke shivering. The next morning brought frost thick enough to crunch underfoot. Noah moved stiffly, joints aching. His hands shook as he worked, clumsier than before. He dropped branches, missed knots, lost time. Fear crept closer. What if they were right? What if this was as far as he got? He considered leaving, just once, packing what little he had and walking until he found someone who couldn't ignore him, someone who would decide for him. The thought sat heavy in his chest. Then the sky changed. Clouds rolled in low and fast, dark and swollen. The air grew heavy, charged. Noah felt it immediately, a pressure that made his ears ring slightly. His instincts snapped to attention. A storm was coming. Not rain, not a passing cold front. Something bigger. He moved with renewed urgency, driven by adrenaline and stubborn refusal. He reinforced the opening, layering bark and weighing it down with stones. He dragged every scrap of insulation he could find inside, packing it tight. He tested the space again and again, feeling for weaknesses. By the time the first snowflakes fell, he was breathing hard, sweat cooling dangerously on his skin. The flakes were small at first, drifting lazily. Then they multiplied. Wind picked up, whipping them sideways. The forest blurred into a wash of white and gray. Noah retreated into the hollow, heart pounding, not just with fear, but with a fierce, reckless hope. This was it, the test everyone was waiting for. As the storm gathered strength outside, Noah sat with his back against the thick wood, listening. The tree groaned faintly, but it didn't crack. Snow slid off the curved surface instead of piling up. The wind screamed, but it slipped past, unable to find an edge to grab. Inside it was cold but steady. Noah hugged his knees, breath fogging in front of him, eyes fixed on the dark opening. If he was wrong, winter would prove it. And if he was right, he swallowed hard, a fragile spark igniting in his chest. They were about to find out. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It crept in the way the worst things always do. Quiet at first, almost polite. Snow sifted down through the trees in thin, drifting sheets, settling softly on branches and leaves. The forest went hushed, as if holding its breath. Noah Carter sat inside the hollow, watching the light fade. He'd learned enough by now to recognize the warning signs. The air pressure had dropped hours ago. The wind had shifted, turning restless and sharp. Every instinct he had told him this wasn't just another cold night. This was the real thing. By early evening, the snowfall thickened. Flakes grew heavier, wetter, clinging to everything they touched. The wind picked up, rattling the treetops, sending sudden gusts racing through the clearing. Noah adjusted the bark at the opening again, pressing stones tighter into place, checking for gaps with numb fingers. His hands burned, then went dull. Inside the hollow, the cold felt different than it did outside. It didn't stab. It pressed. Slow. Persistent. Like it was testing his patience, waiting for him to make a mistake. Noah pulled his hoodie tighter and crouched low, conserving heat the way he'd learned through trial and error. He focused on his breathing, slow in, slower out, trying to quiet the panic that threatened to rise. Hours passed. The storm grew teeth. Wind screamed through the forest, bending trees until they groaned under the strain. Snow turned sideways, slamming against bark and earth with a sharp, constant hiss. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked and fell with a heavy thud. Noah flinched. He imagined what the town looked like now. Streetlights blurred by snow, power lines swaying, people huddled inside houses they trusted without question. He wondered if anyone remembered the kid in the woods, if anyone cared. A sudden gust forced its way through a small gap near the base of the hollow, sending a knife of cold across his ankles. Noah reacted instantly, jamming more leaves and fabric into the space, sealing it tight. "Not tonight," he whispered. His teeth chattered despite his efforts. He tucked his hands under his arms, rocking slightly, willing his body to keep up. Exhaustion pressed down on him, heavy and tempting. That scared him more than the cold. Sleep was dangerous now. He slapped his thighs, flexed his fingers, did anything to stay alert. The storm roared louder, relentless, a living thing determined to wear him down. Then without warning, the wind shifted. The sound changed, deepened, took on a low, furious howl that wrapped around the hollow tree and refused to let go. Snow piled fast, but instead of settling, it slid off the curved surface, dumping to the ground with soft, heavy thumps. Noah noticed it in pieces. The way the roof didn't sag, the way the walls didn't shudder, the way the cold, while brutal, stayed contained. The hollow held, time stretched, warped by fear and fatigue. Noah's thoughts drifted despite his efforts. His mind replayed fragments of his old life, school hallways, locker doors slamming, the smell of his mother's cooking on better days. He shook his head hard. "Stay here, stay now." Another blast of wind slammed into the tree, stronger than the rest. Noah braced instinctively, heart hammering. Nothing gave. The wood absorbed the force, thick and unyielding, like it had been waiting for this exact moment for decades. Snow slid away again, defeated by gravity and shape. A realization flickered through Noah's exhaustion. This tree had survived storms long before him. Bigger ones, worse ones. He wasn't asking it to do anything new. That thought grounded him. He shifted his position slightly, pressing his back against the thickest part of the wall. The wood radiated a faint, stubborn warmth. Not heat, but resistance. Enough to remind him that the cold hadn't won yet. Outside, the storm reached its peak. Visibility dropped to nothing. Wind howled without pause, snow piled against the opening, muffling sound, darkening the world. Noah's flashlight flickered once, then died completely. Darkness swallowed the hollow. Panic surged fast and sharp. Noah forced himself to stay still. He counted breaths, 1, 2, 3. He focused on the physical. His knees pulled to his chest, the pressure of wood against his spine, the steady rhythm of his heart. Minutes blurred into hours. At some point, the cold stopped getting worse. Noah didn't realize it at first. He was too busy fighting fatigue, too busy clinging to awareness. But slowly, gradually, he noticed the absence of a new ache. The pain leveled off instead of deepening. The hollow had reached equilibrium. The storm raged, but inside the temperature held steady, brutal but survivable. Noah let out a broken laugh that turned into a cough. "I'm still here," he whispered, voice raw. The storm didn't care, but the tree did. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, when the wind finally eased from a scream to a growl, Noah's body betrayed him. His eyes closed despite his best efforts. His muscles slackened, exhaustion pulling him under like a tide. For a terrifying moment, he slipped into darkness. Then something woke him. Silence. Not complete, never that, but different. The relentless roar had softened. The pressure in the air lifted slightly, like a weight easing off his chest. Noah's eyes snapped open. He waited, hardly daring to breathe. Outside, the storm was breaking. By the time gray light filtered faintly through the cracks overhead, the wind had dropped to a whisper. Snow lay thick and heavy around the hollow, piled high but uneven, slid away from the tree's curved body like water off stone. Noah shifted slowly, joints screaming in protest. He was alive. The realization hit him all at once, crashing through exhaustion and pain like a wave of pure electric relief. His chest tightened, and for a moment he thought he might cry, but the tears never came. Instead, he laughed, soft at first, then louder, a wild, disbelieving sound that echoed faintly inside the hollow. He pushed the bark aside and crawled out into the cold morning air. The forest was transformed. Snow blanketed everything, smoothing sharp edges, bending branches low. The clearing looked smaller, quieter, like the world had been reset overnight. Noah stood there, breath fogging, taking it in. He turned back to the fallen tree. It was dusted with snow, but intact, unchanged, solid. They had said he wouldn't last. They had been wrong. Noah rested a gloved hand against the bark, grounding himself. Winter had tried to break him, and failed. The storm left quietly the way it had arrived. No dramatic ending, no final roar, just a slow retreat. Like winter itself had grown tired of trying to prove a point. Noah Carter stood at the edge of the clearing, boots sinking into fresh snow, staring at a forest that looked unfamiliar in daylight. Branches sagged under the weight of ice. Paths he'd memorized were buried, erased overnight. The world felt clean and broken at the same time. He pulled his hoodie tighter and exhaled. He was still here. That truth hadn't fully settled yet. It hovered just out of reach, too big to grab all at once. His body ached in places he didn't know existed, and his hands trembled, not from cold anymore, but from the delayed release of fear. Survival came first. Reflection could wait. Noah spent the morning moving carefully, checking what the storm had done. The bark at the opening had held. The insulation hadn't shifted. Snow had piled high around the hollow, but the curved trunk had shed most of it, leaving the space intact. The tree looked almost proud. By midday, the forest wasn't as quiet as it had been at dawn. Distant sounds filtered through the trees. Engines, voices, the crunch of boots on snow. People. Noah froze. Instinct urged him to retreat, to disappear back into the hollow and wait it out. Old habits died hard, but something inside him, tired, stubborn, and strangely calm, held him in place. Let them come. The first to reach the clearing was the volunteer firefighter who'd warned him days earlier. His jacket was dusted with snow, his expression tight and serious. He stopped short when he saw Noah standing there, alive and upright. "Well," the man said slowly, "I'll be damned." Noah didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. The man stepped closer, eyes scanning the fallen tree, the makeshift reinforcements, the packed snow sliding off the trunk. His skepticism softened into something quieter, something that looked a lot like respect. "You stay here all night?" he asked. Noah nodded. The firefighter blew out a breath. "Town didn't fare so well. Power lines down. A couple roofs collapsed. We've got families staying at the school gym." He paused, glancing back at the tree again. "And you're telling me this thing held?" Noah swallowed. "It did." More people arrived in ones and twos. A county worker, an older woman from town who'd once crossed the street to avoid him, a man Noah recognized as one of the teenagers' fathers. They didn't laugh. They stared. Questions came slowly at first, careful, almost hesitant. How long had he been out here? Was he alone? Did he need help? The tone was different now. No teasing, no disbelief. Noah answered what he could, keeping his voice steady even as his heart raced. Being seen like this, really seen, felt unfamiliar and exposed. Someone crouched to examine the bark at the opening. Someone else ran a gloved hand along the trunk, knocking lightly as if testing the wood. "Smart," the older woman murmured. "Real smart." The words landed harder than Noah expected. By late afternoon, the clearing felt crowded. A small knot of people stood talking in low voices, glancing between Noah and the tree like they were trying to reconcile two versions of reality. The kid who wouldn't last, the kid who did. A man stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, face weathered by years of outdoor work. Noah recognized him immediately. The maintenance worker who'd laughed days earlier. "Hey," the man said, clearing his throat. "I owe you an apology." Noah blinked. "I said nobody could live out here," the man continued. "Said it was a joke." He gestured toward the tree. "Looks like the joke was on me." Silence followed. Noah didn't know how to respond to that either. He nodded once, stiffly. The man hesitated, then added, "If you want, there's a hot meal at the gym. Place to warm up." The offer hung in the air. Noah looked back at the hollow tree, the place that had kept him alive, the place that hadn't asked questions or demanded explanations. "I'm okay," he said quietly. The man studied him, then nodded. "If you change your mind." As the group slowly dispersed, whispers followed them back into the forest. Not mocking this time. Curious, thoughtful, changed. By evening, Noah was alone again. The silence felt different now. Less heavy, less threatening. He sat just inside the opening of the hollow, watching the last light fade behind snow-laden branches. His thoughts finally caught up to him, spilling in all at once. They believed him now. The realization was sharp and strange. Validation didn't feel the way he'd imagined it would. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't fill the empty spaces his old life had left behind. But it did something else. It shifted the ground beneath him. For the first time since he'd been kicked out, Noah wasn't just surviving out of spite or desperation. He wasn't proving anything to anyone anymore. He was choosing. Night fell, colder but calmer. Noah tended to his space with practiced movements, reinforcing what needed it, conserving energy. His body knew the routine now. So did his mind. Later, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing again. This time it was his mother. She stood still, arms wrapped around herself, eyes fixed on the fallen tree. She looked smaller than Noah remembered. Older. He didn't move. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I heard," she said finally. Her voice cracked. "About the storm. About you." Noah waited. "I didn't know," she continued, tears shining in her eyes. "I should have known." The words came too late to hurt the way they once would have. Noah felt tired instead. Wary. "I'm okay," he said. She nodded, swallowing hard. "You shouldn't have had to be." Silence stretched again. "I can't change what happened," she said softly. "But I want to help, if you'll let me." Noah looked past her, toward the trees, toward the path he'd walked alone days earlier. The choice pressed heavy in his chest. He didn't answer right away. Winter wasn't over, not yet. But something had shifted. The town had seen the truth, and so had he. Winter didn't end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly, like it was testing Noah Carter one last time, just to be sure. The snow stayed for weeks after the storm, packed hard along the forest floor, melting a little during the day and freezing again at night. Noah learned to move with it, not against it. He cleared narrow paths with patient steps. He adjusted the bark at the opening when the wind changed. He rationed food carefully, accepted help when it was offered, and refused it when it came with strings attached. The hollow tree remained steady. People from town came by occasionally, not to laugh anymore, but to check in. Sometimes they brought soup in dented thermoses. Sometimes they brought questions, real ones. How did you figure this out? Does it stay warm at night? Can I take a look? Noah answered when he felt like it. Other times, he just nodded and went back to his work. He wasn't rude. He just wasn't performing anymore. Something had shifted inside him after the storm. The urgency to prove himself had faded, replaced by a quieter, sturdier confidence. He didn't need applause. He didn't need approval. He had survived. That mattered. The conversations with his mother continued in careful steps. She visited a few times, never pushing, never asking him to come home. They talked about small things at first: school memories, the weather, the way the town felt different after the storm. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the snow gold, she sat on a fallen log and watched him reinforce a section near the base of the hollow. "You've changed," she said softly. Noah didn't look up. "So have you." She nodded, accepting that truth without argument. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said after a moment. "I just didn't want you to think I stopped caring." Noah paused, hands resting against the rough bark. "I don't think that anymore," he said. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close enough to let the air move again. As February turned into March, the town began to repair itself. Roofs were fixed. Power lines went back up. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. But the story of the boy who lived through the storm in a fallen tree didn't fade. It changed shape. People talked about resilience, about paying attention to the land, about how quickly assumptions could fall apart when tested by reality. A teacher from the high school came by one morning, boots crunching in the slush. She stood awkwardly at the edge of the clearing, hands shoved into her pockets. "If you want," she said, "we can figure out school, flexible options, no pressure." Noah thought about it. He thought about the notebook filled with plans and observations, about the way he learned best: by doing, by watching, by solving real problems with his hands and his mind. "I'll think about it," he said. And he did. Spring arrived quietly. Snow receded into the shadows. The stream swelled with meltwater, lively and clear. Buds appeared on branches, stubborn and hopeful. The forest breathed again, and Noah breathed with it. One morning, standing in the clearing, Noah realized something that surprised him. He wasn't afraid of leaving anymore. That didn't mean he would leave right away. The hollow tree had become more than shelter. It was a teacher. It had shown him what patience looked like, what attention could do, what happened when you worked with something instead of trying to conquer it. But he also understood now that strength wasn't about staying hidden forever. It was about choosing your next step. When Noah finally decided to spend a night indoors again, at the community center, on a borrowed cot with clean sheets, it felt strange, almost unreal. The walls were flat, the ceiling too high, the silence different. He slept lightly. The next morning he walked back to the forest. The hollow tree waited unchanged, as if it understood that home wasn't a single place, it was a relationship. Weeks later, as green pushed through the last traces of winter, Noah stood with a small group at the edge of the clearing. A few townspeople, his mother, the firefighter, the maintenance worker who no longer laughed. They listened as Noah spoke, haltingly at first, then with growing ease, about what he'd learned, about insulation and wind direction, about shape and shelter, about paying attention before acting. "I didn't build this place," he said, resting his hand against the bark. "I just learned how to listen to it." No one interrupted. When the group dispersed, Noah stayed behind, alone with the tree one last time that season. He pressed his palm against the wood, feeling its familiar solidity. "Thank you," he whispered, not because the tree had saved him, but because it had shown him who he could become. Noah's story didn't end in that forest. It didn't end with applause or a dramatic rescue. It ended the way most real stories do, with quiet choices, steady growth, and the understanding that survival isn't just about making it through the worst night. It's about what you carry forward when morning comes. Now, here's a question for you. If you were forced to leave everything behind tonight, what would you build to survive, and what would that experience change about who you are? Think about it. And if stories like Noah's move you, stories about resilience, second chances, and finding strength in unexpected places, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes the place everyone laughs at is the place that saves a life.